A Town Square media station serving all of South Jersey. This is 97.3 ESPN, home of the Philadelphia Eagles.
They've got them!
WENJ HD Millville, Atlantic City. This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios. Here's Josh Hennig.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. We are tracking the Phillies Double Header as it is the top of the sixth. Remember, these are only 7-inning double headers, so the Phillies only have a couple more chances to try to win. They're down 2-1 in this game. Flyers are back in action tonight. I got a lot talked about Kevin Durso. I am so exasperated with this Flyers team. You guys heard me complain on Schweim's show and on Sports Bash Saturday on Saturday. Durso and I got to have a conversation on the radio about the Flyers today. He's coming up at 6:20. Also, you guys can chime in and join the conversation with the Eagles, Sixers, and more at 609-403-0973 is the text word. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where you can watch the show as we are live here in the Matt Black Kia Studios here on 97.3 ESPN. I got to start with the Sixers last night because watching Joel Embiid play gets back to a question I asked last week on Twitter. It's a question that we here on 97.3 ESPN, Mike Gill and myself, have asked multiple times. When you look at the Eastern Conference, who is stopping Joel Embiid? Now, I remember when I asked this question originally, about a week and change ago, people really jumped on me. Listen, apparently it was so controversial or whatever that even Jeff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast even tweeted at me about it. So when I think about this team, the Sixers, I genuinely want to know who is going to stop Embiid. People are so obsessed with the Nets that they can't see the forest for the trees. They can't understand the big picture. Part of the big picture is it's not just about how are you going to beat the other team. It's about how the other team is going to beat you. So many times we've heard because of ESPN and other networks and people on social media about Durant, Harden, and Kyrie. But yet they forget that those guys have only played 8 games together this year. 8 games. The majority of the time this year, at least one of those guys has not been on the court. Durant had a hamstring issue, and hamstring issues linger. There's no guarantee he won't hurt again. By the way, Harden is now dealing with a hamstring issue, and he's dealt with a neck issue off and on throughout the year. So he's a little banged up. Now, and those are your 2 gamers if you're a Nets guy. If you're a Nets proponent, a Nets fan, a sports gambler who went to the local establishment or on your app on your phone, like FanDuel Sportsbook, and took a futures bet on the Nets to win the title, you should be sweating because you have your 2 most important players who have missed a ton of games. And don't forget the third guy, Kyrie Irving, seems to find a lot of reasons to actually not do his job and go to work each day. That guy takes more personal time than anybody I've ever seen who's a millionaire in my life. For a guy who has a job being paid millions of dollars, that dude finds every excuse in the book, whether they're legitimate or not, to not work. It's incredible, but I digress. So the 76ers, I have way more confidence in them going into the postseason than I do these other teams. And when I look around the NBA, specifically the Eastern Conference, I ask the question, who's slowing down Embiid? Because it's certainly not Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge, DeAndre Jordan. It's certainly not in Boston, Mo Wagner, or either Williams. Look at the rest of the Eastern Conference. Who's stopping Embiid? I think Clint Capella is a little washed right now. I think he's a little past due on his ability at this point. And again, I think Clint Capella is a good, serviceable center in the NBA. But I think that we've seen now him get dunked on a few times this year on plays that in the past he probably wouldn't have been dunked on. I think he's been exposed. He's not the defensive stopper consistently he used to be. It's a shame because he's only, 26, 27 years old. Not that he's old, but when you get dunked on that many times, I'm not really worried about you stopping Embiid. The only guy in the Eastern Conference I think has a legitimate chance of slowing Embiid down is Bam Adebayo because he's athletic and because he's young and because it seems like the spotlight doesn't faze him. But aside from him, there's nobody else. Kevin Kincaid from Crossing Broad was on the Sports Bash for Inside the Sixers earlier today and said this.
Joel Embiid goes out, gets a couple of early fouls. One of those guys sits on the bench, and now what? Brooklyn's doesn't have an answer for Embiid, and they might go small, which would stress the Sixers on the defensive end. But I think it's fair because everybody says, who are you going to have to guard Durant, Harden, Irving? I think it's really fair to say, who are you going to have to guard Embiid? Because they're a team that is not stout defensively, and the Sixers score a lot of points too.
Oh, and by the way, tomorrow night's game in Philadelphia versus the Nets, Tim Bontemps of ESPN just tweeted this, and I'll pop it up on the screen for those of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. For those of you listening on 97.3 ESPN and 97.3 ESPN mobile app, I'll read it for you. Speaking of the Nets in tomorrow night's game, Tim Bontemps says, hard to imagine Durant will be playing tomorrow in Philadelphia against the Sixers in what is a massive game for both teams. He says that in response to Kevin Durant, who they played today in the Nets game that was rescheduled from Monday that got pushed to Tuesday. They're blowing the Timberwolves out by 40 points. And Durant played 26 minutes in the game. So a game that is important for both teams, you decided to play Durant in the Timberwolves game, and now he might not be available for the Sixers game. So, first of all, the Nets can't stay healthy. They've only played 8 games together with their big three. They don't play very good defense. And apparently now they mismanaged the schedule because if you're the Nets, you don't want to be the 2 seed. Nobody wants to be the 2 seed because if you end up being the 2 seed, you're going to have probably the tougher road. You look at the NBA standings, the 1 seed usually plays, what is that? Oh, that's right, the 8 seed. And the 2 seed plays the 7 seed. This is basic math here, folks. I got the standings right there in front of you. The Sixers right now are currently a half a game ahead of the Nets. If the Sixers get the 1 seed instead of the Nets, who haven't been healthy, can't keep it together, are going to have the harder road in the second round. But hey, don't play Kevin Durant tomorrow. For every person who tells me, oh, well, the Nets are the favorite, the Nets this, the Nets that, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the same Nets team? Same Nets team. They couldn't even play the head properly. You don't think Steve Nash and somebody going to talk to him and say, hey, Steve, we have the Sixers game tomorrow. It's really important for us. We could probably the Timberwolves without needing Durant out there. Could you maybe either limit his minutes or not play him if we're worried about him? Now, apparently, he might not play tomorrow. Just another reason why, when I look at the Sixers, I see a team that makes a lot more sense to me than the Nets. A heck of a lot more sense. Because one team is going out there and attempting to win. The other team hasn't. Keith Smith joined Mike Gill on the Sports Bash last week. Yahoo Sports said this about the Nets.
They're clearly going to be very, very good. But I think you want to get at least 10, 12 games if you can with all 3 of those guys in the lineup especially ideally, you'd like to play a couple close games into the fourth quarter. So what you can do then is get a sense of, all right, what's our pecking order? Who's going to have the ball? Where are you going to be on the floor? And those kind of things, because that is important. You don't want to have the first time you're experiencing that in the postseason, because that has the potential to be a problem for you.
At this rate, I don't think the Nets will even get 5 games together on the court. They can't even get on the court together now. And by the way, do you hear what he said? Close games together. I don't think a 40-point deficit for the Timberwolves counts as a close game. Jason Fitz last week on the Sports Bash with Mike Gill brought up a point that I have brought up multiple times. He said this.
I think Brooklyn's going to implode. And I don't know why we don't acknowledge this more. It's fun during the regular season to watch Harden do what Harden does. But in a 7-game series, when things start to go a little hairy against competition, who's getting the ball? Is it going to be Durant or is it going to be Harden? And when they go through that process, how are they going to feel about it? Like, how's the other guy going to feel about being the other guy for the first time in his career?
Here's what we know. There is one guy of those 3 who stepped up and said, this is going to be my role. I'm going to be the facilitator. I'm going to be the guy who runs the offense for the other 2 guys. That was James Harden. Meanwhile, Kyrie is too busy doing whatever Kyrie's doing, and Durant, when he's not playing, is in Twitter beefs with Shannon Sharp apparently now. That's what we're talking about the Nets. So I'm not discounting the Nets, but I'm saying that I think a lot of people out there are discounting the Sixers. Because at the end of the day, nobody is stopping Embiid. Who's going to stop Embiid? Brook Lopez? Come on. By the way, Vucevic for the Bulls, he doesn't play defense. You see him last night? He just olayed like 3 guys going for dunks last night in the Bulls game. It was ridiculous. You have a guy in the Sixers who is a unstoppable force, and there is no immovable object for him to collide with. But I'm supposed to believe that I'm supposed to be scared of the Nets. I can't even get the Nets on the court together. I can't even promise you that Durant will play tomorrow night. That's right. Those are just tuning in now. Tim Bontemps, ESPN. Hard to imagine Durant will be playing tomorrow in the Sixers game. And what's a massive game for both teams. The winner clinches the tiebreaker tomorrow. But you decide to play Durant today in a blowout against the Timberwolves. Man. You think the Nets should be the favorites. I hope you guys who put your money where your mouth is are clinching those tickets really hard right now. But I got a way for you to make up some of that money that you might have lost on the Nets, and that's with FanDuel Sportsbook. Because right now, FanDuel is letting new users swing for the fences risk-free, up to $1,000 back if your first bet doesn't win. Or if you're an existing user, you can get up to $25 back each day if your same-game parlay falls 1 leg short. These are just some of the ways that FanDuel Sportsbook is America's #1 sportsbook. Their app is simple to use, and when you win with FanDuel, they pay you your winnings in as little as 24 hours. So whether you want to get on the basketball action, the baseball action, or maybe if you're a glutton for punishment, you want to bet on the Flyers, you can do it all with FanDuel Sportsbook. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app or go to sportsbook.fanduel.com and use my promo code Hennig to get in on all the action and get your first bet risk-free, up to $1,000. That's promo code Hennig with FanDuel Sportsbook. Must be 21 or to play and present NJRPA. First online real money wager only for risk-free bet. Refund issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Restrictions apply. See sportsbook.fanduel.com for details. Gambling problem, like you guys who bet on the Nets, call them 1-800-GAMBLER. I'm not saying Nets can't win a championship, but I'm saying maybe they shouldn't be the prohibitive favorite. Because at the end of the day, if it's the fourth quarter and we got 4 minutes left and the Sixers have a 4-point lead and Joel Embiid has the ball with 10 seconds left and your best option is to double team him and Danny Green hits a 3 in your eye, you're going to be wondering, why the heck did we sign LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin? And why did we trade away Jared Allen again? Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. I got more gripes with the Flyers coming up next. So I'm displeased with you Nets lovers. Now I'm displeased with the Flyers as well. We'll talk to Kevin Durso. Excuse me, the orange and the black coming up next here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City. And of course, don't forget, with the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, you can customize your alerts. So if you want Eagles, Sixers, Flyers, Phillies, or South Jersey High School sports updates, you can go on the app, customize your alerts, and only get those alerts exclusively with the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Download it now on the Google Play and Apple stores.
It's the 2021 NFL Draft exclusively on 97.3 ESPN. Who will the Eagles take with the 12th pick?
With the 12th pick, Philadelphia Eagles select.
Tune in to 97.3 ESPN to find out. Thursday, April 29. Round 1 coverage begins at 7 p.m. It's the 2021 NFL Draft, and it's only on South Jersey's exclusive radio home for Philadelphia Eagles football. 97.3 ESPN.
When it comes to wings in the Delaware Valley, nobody beats the Piccalilli Inn. Enjoy ice-cold beer and their world-famous wings, tails, or ears on the pit patio. Try new flavors like garlic parmesan, Jim Beam maple, or smoker. You'll see why people drive from all over for the Picks. World-famous wings and home-style favorites. Whether you're headed to or from the shore, for eat-in or take-out, make tonight the night. You visit the one, the only, the original Piccalilli Inn, Route 206, Chemung, New Jersey. For live music and specials, like them on Facebook.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. For better or for worse, the Flyers are back in action tonight as they are going to take on the Capitals for the first time in the next 7 days. They play them again on Saturday. So we get them again tonight. Saturday will be in Philadelphia. Kevin Durso is going to join us here in the Bulldog Kind of Hotline because I have a lot of grievances with the Flyers. Also, Kevin's a good person to actually put up with us in our crazy questions. He joins us. He's our Flyers insider for 97.3 ESPN.com and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Kevin, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. How are you?
I think you're doing better than I am when it comes to the Flyers, at least. Or at least you put on a better face than I do. So yesterday, the trade deadline, I don't think anybody really thought there was anything crazy going to happen, but I just feel like this organization, their hands are tied, and it's almost like they're resigned to it. Like they almost don't even want to try until after the season at this point. It's almost like they're kind of like saying, you know what, this season is what it is. We'll try to figure it out in the offseason. And I just don't have a good feeling about that kind of mentality.
Well, they're resigned to the fact that they can't do much until the offseason because that's what the rest of the league is basically telling them they can't. You know, if you had trade partners out there for everybody you want to try to unload, then by all means go ahead and try to do it, but you don't right now. And, you know, I think that, you know, Broads and I talked about this on Open Ice Hits this morning. We did an episode for today, and we're doing an episode for later this week to break down some of the trades around the league because there were so many we want to get into, and it felt like a busy trade deadline, but realistically it was not as busy as it typically is. And as a result of that, you see a lot of teams. There was a story on ESPN where one GM said, just wait until the draft rolls around. It's going to be crazy. Then if this was mild, that it's really going to get crazy at the draft. And that's what the Flyers are really holding out for is once you get to the draft in the offseason, that's going to be the time to do some stuff. You know, the expansion draft's going to happen first. Then you got the NHL draft, and then you've got free agency all in the span of about a week's time, maybe I'll say a week and a half to be safe because there really is there's not much of a tampering period in the NHL. It's pretty much all going to kick off on that first day as they've scheduled it for right now. So you're pretty much going to see deals take a little bit longer. It used to be that when free agency started, noon would hit on July 1st, which is typically when it would happen. It's not this year, obviously, with the playoffs going on, but it would happen, and you would have deals rolling in for the next 3 hours because everybody knew where they were going to go by then. Now that's really when your negotiations start. So that'll be probably about a half a week to a week-long process to see guys start to really find their home and go where they're going to go. But the deal's done long before then if you're going to make trades. It's the draft is when it happens, and that's what they're holding out for. I'm sure there's going to be some things to come. I'm sure that this is, let's put it this way. I think the most telling thing that Chuck Fletcher said at the press conference yesterday, I wasn't on it because of being on with Mike yesterday, but I went back and watched after the fact and wrote a story on it. And his one-word answer about the coaching staff says it all. He could have given an answer, and I can see a GM in that position if I were in his shoes, trying to give an answer that is, kind of on the safe side, where you sit there and you go, no, we don't plan on making a coaching change at the moment, but when the season's over, we'll evaluate everything because we have to, and you could say that. He flat out just said no to everything that had to do with the coaching staff, as in they're not going anywhere now, and they're not going anywhere into next year, which means every player on this team, no matter who you are, even guys like Claude Drew and Kevin Hayes with the no-move clauses, you've got to earn your spot next year right now. You've got to earn everything for the rest of the year. And I'm sure, for Drew, it's not as much of a pressure point here, but it definitely is for other guys. It definitely is for some of these younger guys especially. You've got to show that you want to be here and you want to be part of this, because as much as I said stuff about the organization and where things have gone and the way things are in that building right now, Chuck Fletcher doesn't feel that way, and Alain Vigneault doesn't feel that way, because those are two guys that came here. Chuck Fletcher's family history, his father, Cliff Fletcher, is a Hall of Fame general manager, and Chuck, his son, is now trying to follow in his footsteps, wants to put together a winner, and Alain Vigneault has done everything that you can as a head coach except for win a Stanley Cup, and that's what he's in it for. So they're trying, they want to turn this thing around, and they want to do it the way that they can, and they're going to say everything they can to make it seem like everything's good, but you can kind of see the writing on the wall. It's not perfect. They've got to work on it. But they're in it to do the right things and to make this a team that can compete and a team that's entertaining again. But the business side of it still, we're never going to hear from Dave Scott. We're never going to see that side of it, and that's the way that it is. But those two guys, trust me, they're working on it because that's what they're in this for. That's why they were outsiders who came into the picture. So that's really why this centers around the draft, and Chuck Fletcher knows that this is a big offseason for him.
Well, part of that being the big offseason is you mentioned Giroux. And I know you and Gil talked to him about it yesterday, but I'm gonna repeat what I said on Saturday because I'm not backing off of this. And I say this to somebody who I've never been a Giroux hater. And one of these guys who's like, he's overrated. To me, I'm kind of indifferent about him. He's kind of just been there. But now him being there is a problem to me. Because if you have this C on your chest and I see these many problems on the ice and I see the guys looking just totally disconnected and disinterested on the bench, to me, they need to go out and they need to go big, go find somebody to be the new captain and replace him. I think that the Giroux era needs to end because obviously this era of Giroux has gotten the Flyers only so far. And somebody in that organization has turned around and be like, Giroux, we thank you for everything you've done. If you want to stay here, that's fine. But we're going to find somebody else to be the captain because your captaincy has resulted in very little success and engagement on the ice this season.
Most of that is fair. I'll say that. And here's where I'm kind of going with that. He definitely doesn't need to leave the team to have this happen. He can still be a part of it. And I kind of started to say this last year where if you can get to a point where he's not the number one guy and he's not the guy you focus on for the production, put the team on your back, that kind of thing, then you're in an okay spot. At his age and at his experience level, he's a guy a lot of teams would like to have. And a guy who knows what it takes to make the playoffs, who probably knows what it takes to win a playoff series because he came up with guys who know what it takes to win a playoff series. He was coming up when it was Mike Richards and Jeff Carter. He was coming up with Chris Pronger. They're guys who know how to get it done. And he learned under that, so he definitely knows what it takes. He just needs a support system around him, and he doesn't necessarily have to be the guy, especially as his prime years are past him. So that all is fair. I don't think they need to go do anything with him. I don't think they need to trade him. I don't think they need to even necessarily sit there and say beyond the contract, that's the end of the era. They can find a way to keep him around. I don't think he can be your $8 million player anymore. I'll say that for sure. And maybe it is time to make him not the focal leader anymore. He wears the C, so he gets all the attention. And that's why we see things out there. And that's why there's this back and forth about, it is not all his fault. He wears a lot of it because he's the captain. It's not all his fault because this is the ultimate team sport. This is the sport that starts with the goaltender. It's defensive play, it's forwards, it's scoring, it's power play, it's penalty kill, and you don't do it all typically. There's not many guys out there that are 1,000% involved in everything. Even obviously they're not because your captain doesn't necessarily play goal. There's never a goalie who's a captain. Your top player is sometimes a winger, sometimes a defenseman, sometimes the goalie, but they're not going to play different positions and be that kind of versatile. So it takes the entire village here to make it happen. And that's why, when the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup last year, it's why when they go out and make trades and get Kevin Shattenkirk, a veteran for the blue line, and get Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow and guys like that who are not big names but fill the roles really well, you just have to put all the pieces of the puzzle in place because a guy like Claude Giroux is only going to play 20 minutes a night maybe, and the other 40 minutes, he's not responsible for what happens on the ice for those 40 minutes. He can be a guy who's trying to be vocal from the bench. He can be trying to lead by example and set the tone, but he doesn't do what has to happen for the other 40 minutes. That's on everybody else. So you've got to have that unit around you. You've got to have that group around you that sets the tone and follows along with it. So maybe that's where the change comes. I don't know. Part of that also is that the captaincy thing is a locker room thing. It really has no bearing on it sometimes doesn't mean it's your best player. It sometimes doesn't mean that it's the number one guy. We focus on it that way because we see so many captains that are the number one guy. We think of Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin. Those are the guys who are captain. So you assume it's the best player. Not always the case, but he's been the captain for so long now, and he's been with the team for so long now that, yes, it's starting to feel like he needs to be able to be utilized in a lesser role, not necessarily in terms of playing time, but he doesn't need to be the guy who, like, is he on the first power play unit? Is he centering the top line, winger on the top line, or whatever? And if he's playing the second line and he's not the go-to guy on the power play, then I think there's less complaints about it. So that's why it feels the way it does. I don't think he needs to be gone. I think there's changes around him that need to happen. But nonetheless, he's going to shoulder a lot of the blame for the entire era and it's not his fault that they didn't have that support system around him.
And no, it's not all his fault. And I don't believe that. I just feel like at some point, and listen, this is not his personality, okay? And maybe I'm just biased in how I look at this. I need somebody on this team to just go in the locker room. Like we hear in football and basketball, players only meeting, right? You know what I mean? Like the idea of like grabbing somebody by the jersey and saying, why the heck is the goaltender facing shots with nobody defending the guy with the puck? Like things like that to me, like at some point, somebody needs to start grabbing dudes by the jersey or getting in their face, because to me, I don't think this is a coaching issue. I think this is a player issue. I see guys missing assignments. They're not rotating. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. And at some point, the guys with the letters on their jerseys, whether it's a C or the A, they're supposed to be the guys who do that. And to me, I just wonder if Giroux's time has passed him by and there needs to be a different voice. I don't know if that's the guy on the team right now. I was saying over the weekend, I would love to see the Flyers go out and get Johnny Gaudreau and just slap the C on his chest. I'm not saying because you're on with me, because I just think that. I think that I see Gaudreau play the level of passion in Calgary, because I watch a lot of late night hockey. When I watch Vegas and when I watch Calgary and when I watch St. Louis and when I watch Chicago, I see guys playing with passion that I wish the Flyers would have a little bit more gumption of.
Well, I'll try to address it in a couple different layers here, because first of all, you're absolutely right about one thing that you said for sure and certain. I'm agreeing with you 1,000% on this one. It is not a coaching issue. It hasn't been a coaching issue for the last decade, really, because they've gone through a number of coaches, as I've talked about before. And if the same results are happening, and now you've got a future Hall of Fame head coach in place, by the way, if it's not working with him here either, then it's obviously the players at this point. And I think that was what Chuck Fletcher was saying with that very, tense and short no that he gave to the question about the coaching staff. It's not the coaches, it's the players. Everybody's on watch right now. Now, that being said, I look at the captains of this team over the years and going back pretty decently far at this point, and there's only one guy who really stands out that I think has set the tone for what Giroux was almost expected to be and isn't, because it's not his style, you're right, and that's Pronger. I think when Pronger was the captain, that was the guy who got in front of the microphone and got an attitude about it and had this, I don't want to call it swagger, but he did have an attitude in front of the camera and would call players out like that. And that was his style. And there's not a lot of guys out there. Like I don't know that Mike Richards was that way. I don't believe that Eric Lindros was that way. Guys like that. Keith Primo was a captain for a while. I don't believe he was that way. They were kind of more of the soft-spoken, I'm going to go out there and show you what I can do, and not be that kind of guy. Like everybody said that about Mike Richards. Mike Richards was the look at what he does on the ice. That's the way you lead a team. He goes out and performs that way, and there's where the passion is. He doesn't have to come in and give a rah-rah speech to make everybody get up. He goes out and delivers a big hit or makes a big play, and then it's follow the leader. Now, Claude Giroux showed signs of that in his career at the time he was transitioning into that captaincy role, but I feel like people want a little bit of Pronger in him too. They want a guy who looks at all of the years of the struggle, all of the years of the mediocrity, and starts calling on people and starts saying, what are you doing out there? Why are you playing this way? Why are you making the same mistakes? Why aren't you bettering yourself? And calls them out like that. And maybe, in the same way, gets that way in front of the media too, to an extent. Instead of being very, trying to say that they've got a good team and they're going to make the playoffs and all that type of stuff, because he's done that a lot over his time as captain. He's had to kind of deflect to that. If you have to keep doing that, but you don't get that attitude behind it, I think people want to see a Chris Pronger response from him after all this time. That it's unacceptable. And he does have those moments very briefly, and they're not nearly on the same level as Pronger was. But you can tell when he's upset and when he's not willing to really give long answers to questions and things like that. But I had people tweeting me throughout the last couple of weeks about how Shane Gostisbehere was talking, because he came flat out and said a lot of things, some of which we can't repeat on the air, I should say. But He said it in such a blunt way that it was like, wow, there actually is a guy in the room that gets it, that sees what we see, that sees what everybody's been watching for the last month and sees that it's not just one guy, it's everybody leaving the entire team out to dry. The goalies get left out to dry, everybody. So you have that guy who gives those answers, and it was really funny because the timing of him being waived was very ironic in that sense because he had said those things, and it kind of like was almost like he said the truth. They don't have much of an identity, and they're leaving the goalies out to dry, and they're not playing well. And he got put on waivers for it. Now, realistically, it didn't mean that because ultimately, now that Eric Gustafson's gone, and Chuck Fletcher, for probably the first time in a long time, did actually mention Shane Gossamer and say he's had a resurgence lately. It feels like he's gaining their trust and kind of a, well, ho-hum kind of thing, like you're playing him in a third pairing role and on the top power play unit, you put him in the perfect spot, and he's succeeding because of it. No kidding, because he's playing the right way and he's playing the right role. He's not getting the top minutes. You tried to put him on a pairing with Ivan Provorov at one point in time. Yeah, he kind of gets exposed in that role. You put him on the third pairing, limit his even strength minutes, give him power play. You've got a shot with him now, and I almost wonder if that means that he can factor into their plans, assuming he doesn't go in expansion or something like that. So it's all very interesting how it comes together, but I think that that's the thing with Giroux, is that Giroux is the successor to Chris Pronger, who was the vocal guy, who called guys out, who did get in front of the media and have an attitude, and Giroux's the polar opposite. And after so many years of that, I think people want to see a guy with a little bit more vigor.
Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider for 97.3 ESPN.com, joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN at Kevin_Durso on Twitter. Of course, the Flyers take on the Capitals at the top of the hour, 7 p.m. right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Kevin, for the game tonight, this will be the first game of after the deadline for the Flyers. I know Raffles not playing for the Capitals tonight. I know they will have another guy they acquired expected to be in the lineup tonight. What changes do you expect to see from the Flyers on the ice tonight, if any?
Well, for one, Sam Moran's back in the lineup and Phil Myers is out. So that's a big change because, first of all, obviously that brings size into play. And Phil Myers is a big guy in his own right, but Moran's really got the thunderous side to him. And it's kind of interesting, when the Flyers played the Capitals, I believe it was 3 times in 1 week back in March, and that's the last time they've played them. Tom Wilson was out on suspension, and he's back now, and that's kind of their physical guy. Now Moran's in the lineup. You kind of can sense that there could be some fireworks to come if things get out of hand a little bit, because that's the type of guy Moran is, and that's the type of guy Wilson is. But beside the point there on those changes, I think, certainly for a guy like Scott Lawton, whose future is well determined here at this point, who's shown enough to this point that he's got the contract and he's got the years in front of him, he's not going anywhere, obviously. The pressure's off a little bit. You can kind of play a little bit more freer because you know your place. But for the rest of the guys, the pressure should be on. And I'm not talking about for a playoff race, even though Alain Vigneault said he still thinks it's a playoff team. He's probably paid to say that to an extent. You're paid to get in front of the camera and say, it's not over until it's over.
Smile on, put a good spin on it, kind of thing.
Right, and not only that, but look, your job is to sit there and look at the standings and say 4 points back, 15 games to go. There's hockey left to be played. We're in it to try to make the playoffs. Even though every team in front of you went and made a significant move to upgrade their roster, the Capitals included. Anthony Mantha's in the lineup tonight from Detroit. Now, Washington did give up some significant pieces in that for them in as well, because Jacob Vrana was a guy who I liked all the time when they would play. He's a really talented player, and he's off to Detroit now. And Richard Panik was kind of a guy who was hovering between waiver life and that kind of thing and didn't play all the time, so he was part of the deal as well. And they sent a couple draft picks over to get this guy. So this is really, that's their buying move. That's their go all in, and let's see what we get with this guy. And I'd be very curious to see how he fits. He's playing on a really good line, by the way, because he's got Nicholas Backstrom and TJ Oshie with him, and that's certainly significant. So their top 6 looks lethal right now because you're not sacrificing anything with the Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, Wilson trio at this point. Right. And certainly their depth is good, and defensively they're good, and all that type of stuff. So they've got a good lineup. Now it's just about seeing how much it clicks instantly for Mantha as the new guy. It's going to be an experience for him. The fact that he's playing this early, though, is obviously a good sign. Sometimes, especially with a coach like Peter Laviolette, who's got a lot of experience, you may have seen the guy get maybe a day just to get his bearings straight. He just got traded at the 3 p.m. deadline. Literally, it happened around that time. So he's had basically just over 24 hours to kind of figure out where he's going. Now, he was, granted, Detroit happened to be in North Carolina in Raleigh last night, so it wasn't that far of a trip for him as compared to going from Detroit. So he happened to get there in good time and join his new teammates. So he's ready to go, and that'll be an interesting thing to watch. And obviously, all the other guys on that team for Washington, Ovechkin, Backstrom, Kuznetsov, Oshie, all those guys, they're an offensive juggernaut when they get going, all collectively anyway. And Ovechkin certainly had the Flyers number all year, so that's why I keep an eye on him all the time.
He's Kevin Durso. You heard it mentioned the Open Ice Hits podcast. Him and Broads host that together. 97.3 ESPN alumni Hunter Brody. Him and Kevin Durso host that podcast together. All of Kevin Durso's coverage of the Flyers and the NHL at Kevin_Durso on Twitter, at 97.3 ESPN.com. And it's all guests. He appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, I appreciate you putting up with my questions, and hopefully the Flyers don't embarrass themselves tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh.
Kevin Durso does great work. Again, check him out at Kevin_Durso on Twitter. All right, coming up next, we'll get back to your thoughts and comments. I got a bunch of people on the text board. I got a bunch of people on the YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I'm going to get to all of your comments coming up next here on Game Night. I'm Josh Hennig. This is 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City. And of course, don't forget, you can download the 97.3 ESPN mobile app for free, customize your alerts, and get your Flyers, Sixers, Phillies, Eagles, and South Jersey High School sports coverage all on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app and at 97.3ESPN.com. We hear from you guys who are listening and watching next.
It's Philadelphia Flyers hockey tonight on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app with Tim Saunders and Steve Coates calling all the play-by-play action.
Oh, big save by Carter Hart.
The Flyers are in D.C. to face the Capitals. Tonight, coverage begins at 7 p.m. It's Philadelphia Flyers hockey on the radio home of the Flyers in South Jersey, 97.3 ESPN, and listen live on the free mobile app.
If you own a small business, you know how hard it can be to find new customers. Now, Town Square Media has new tools that can help your business stand out and grow. Go to GetLocalCustomersNow.com for a free competitive analysis that will show you what other businesses are doing to find new customers and how you can do it too with Town Square Media. Be one of the first business owners to sign up and receive $500 in free advertising on this station. Start growing your business today. Visit GetLocalCustomersNow.com. That's GetLocalCustomersNow.com.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. We are live here in the Matt Black Kia studios. Yes, Matt Black Kia, they want to get you approved today. That's Matt Black Kia in the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township. The Phillies are still tied 2-2. We'll see if this game decides to end anytime this hour. This was the thing Mike Gill talked about earlier, the dreaded, what if the first Phillies game goes too long? What does ESPN's national telecast do then? Oh my. We'll get to your guys' thoughts and comments here. Text board is open at 609-403-0973. Also, guys watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. A couple comments came in here. I want to start with we got Paul, Jeff, Dan, and Mike. So we got a bunch of comments to get to. We'll get to all you guys coming here. I'm going to get to the order that your thoughts and comments came in. First was Paul a little bit earlier in the show, says on Facebook, Paul Westcott says, we saw what happened with the Clippers last year with all their load management, lacked chemistry, was bounced. Net starters played way less games than the Clippers last year. Nets may face the same fate, says Paul on Facebook. Yeah, Paul, listen, I think it's a very good example. I think it's not 100% apple, because part of the reason why the Clippers had a problem last year was because of the bubble. There were some guys in the NBA circles who have admitted they just couldn't handle the environment of the bubble, that everything happened in 2020, it affected them emotionally and mentally, and Paul George was one of those guys, and you gave Paul George that money to show up in the playoffs, and you know, maybe last year was an anomaly, right? Maybe last year was Paul George proving that Paul George can only do so much. I don't know what the exact answer is to that, but it is something to keep an eye on. It is definitely something to keep an eye on with the Nets, because if they haven't played together, what are they going to do? Jeff Bonin Pookie chimes in, says the Nets don't know what they're doing. By the way, Malika Andrews of ESPN, Steve Nash told the media after the game today versus the Timberwolves that Kyrie Irving's availability to play Philadelphia tomorrow will still be determined. He missed today's game for personal reasons. LaMarcus Aldridge is expected to rejoin the team, but his status is also to be determined. I mean, so there's a possibility Durant doesn't play tomorrow and Kyrie. We have no idea what Harden's status is anymore because he's got a neck, he's got a hamstring. You know, Harden is the one guy I can at least promise you wants to play. He's a gamer. They have to make him sit because of injuries. So, Jeff, you're right. The Nets don't know what they're doing. The Nets literally played Kevin Durant today, and they might not have him tomorrow, or he might have been on minutes restriction tomorrow because he played today. Tomorrow is arguably the most important game of the year for the Sixers and the Nets. The team who wins tomorrow gets the tiebreaker for the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, but yet Kyrie Irving might not be available and Durant might not be available, and we're just supposed to accept that. That's your Eastern Conference favorite, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not saying the Sixers are going to win an NBA championship, but I would say slow your roll on the Nets. That's what I'm saying. They are the Nets, by the way. And you know what? There might be something to say for the fact that Steve Nash is a player's coach, so maybe he's giving them way more rope than they need to have. 609-403-0973. Dan and EHT chimed in on the text board saying, the Sixers do worry me if our Batman, Joel Embiid, is our center and our Robin isn't even an all-star. Talking about Tobias Harris. It's an unusual formula in the modern NBA. What do you think, Josh? Listen, it is an unusual formula, but this is what you sign up for. You sign up for unusual. The Sixers have invested a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources into these players. Okay? There's something to be said for the fact that if you invested all this time and all this energy into these players, you're probably, this is what you're signing up for. You're signing up for unusual. The Sixers are the only team in the NBA right now that's built around a big man. Every other team is not built around a big man. They're all built around perimeter players. So, and as I said earlier, I don't even know if the Batman Robin analogy is accurate, because Joel Embiid believes that he can be the second coming or better than Hakeem Olajuwon. Hakeem won 2 championships. The first one with no real sidekick, and the second one with an older Clyde Drexler. So you could argue that the Sixers might have a better roster right now than that Rockets team did when they won their first championship. Listen, go back and look at that team. A very young Sam Cassell, a very young big shot Bob, Robert Horry. I mean, you had some nice players on that team, but nothing amazing, nothing spectacular, nothing that screams all-star, superstar, a guy that every team in the league wants guys around Olajuwon. It was a good team, not a great team, but he led them. If Embiid can just get to that Olajuwon level, you have a chance to get to an NBA Finals. Again, I'm not promising you'll win it, but I think you can get there. So I think the problem is that we're looking at the Batman and Robin analogy, and realistically, I don't even know if the Sixers have a Robin. I think it's more like, I know Kevin Kincaid brought up the Fantastic Four earlier. It's an okay analogy. I appreciate the effort. If you're going to go superhero teams, this is probably more like Team Arrow, where if anybody's, knows about the Green Arrow or watch the TV show, you have the Green Arrow, and then you have his supporting cast around him. And even though he's the head guy, the whole cast is all very good, but not elite superheroes. So whether it's Red Arrow, whether it's Speedy, whether it's any of them, it just, they are what they are. So I kind of feel like the Sixers are built to complement Embiid and Simmons. They're not built to be a Batman and Robin situation specifically. Let's get one more message in here before we get the break. Mike on YouTube said, I think it makes the most sense for the Eagles to take a cornerback in the draft. Well, Mike on YouTube, you must be reading my article at 973ESPN.com, where I laid out all the information for why the Eagles need to take a cornerback. Go to 973ESPN.com or 973ESPN mobile app. Check it out. For those of you who may still want a wide receiver or maybe looking for Mike Parsons. So Mike Parsons is a bad player, but I explained to you why in the article why cornerback's more important. By the way, shout out to a loyal viewer and listener, Jeff Bonambuki. It is good to have sports back. Sports is back. It's full throttle. Now, if we can just get the players to report to OTAs, actually want to practice with each other. Moving on. Flyers coming up next at the top of the hour. Tim Saunders, Chief Coach on the call. Flyers versus Capitals here on 97.3 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig. I'll catch you tomorrow.
It's your chance to win Sports Bash Cash up to $10,000. Enter the code words every day at 973ESPN.com or with the free mobile app. The more codes you enter, the more chances you have to win up to $10,000. Here's the Sports Bash Cash code word.
Phone. 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 Enter it now on our website, 973ESPN.com, or use the free mobile app. Sports Bash Cash is brought to you by Jersey Shore Federal Credit Union for all your lending needs. Get the next Sports Bash Cash code word tomorrow morning at 9:55.
It's Sports Bash Cash 10 times a day, every weekday at 55 after each hour, from 9:55 a.m. to 6:55 p.m. Listen all day for your chance to win Sports Bash Cash up to $10,000.